It has been a very interesting program. Heard a lot of stuff on Qt on the desktop. It's now 4 o'clock, so I'd like to invite our other contestant in this last part to show their face. And I'll introduce them in order that they show up. I shouldn't have said that, should I? Now they will not show up. So the first one here is my good friend, my boss, and everything else, Matthias Kalle-Dahlheimer from KDAP. I will just clap here.
Thank you. Yes, I do not speak without having received an applause first. So yes, Kalle Dahlheimer, president and founder of KDAB, been running the show over here for 21 years now, and I've been developing with Qt since summer 1996, which was in the version back then was 0.98. So I've been around for a while. I've seen many ups, few downs, and I shall continue to run the good ship KDAB together with my colleagues, and which quite heavily involves being deeply into Qt. So I am excited about the future.
That's great. So there is a Giuseppe De Angelo, also known as Pepper. So maybe you can introduce yourself, Pepper.
Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Giuseppe D'Angelo. I am a kind of, not exactly an old fart, but a semi-old. I've been around for quite some time in the Qt community. I've written a lot of Qt code. I've given the keynote a few days ago if you want to know more about what's going to happen in Qt 6. So catch up with me. I'm generally speaking an Italian guy, so very loud, and I move my hands around a lot, perhaps too much. So I'm kind of restraining myself right now in media. And yeah, I'm pretty much all around when it comes to things like Qt Core, Qt GUI, 3D graphics, modern C++. That's me at the moment.
Thank you very much. That leaves Harry to show up.
No, I'm
Welcome,
here.
Harry.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm the co-founder of FrogLogic, which is a company that is into the quality assurance of Qt application and others. And we are here, happy to be here, because we are seeing KDAP on a lot of customer sites where they're helping our customers with their development, and they've also helped us getting our tools implemented there. And so we are very grateful of that cooperation. And I'm looking forward to talking about Qt here. I joined the Qt development when I read Kalle Dahlheimer's famous article in the German CT magazine, and that got me hooked into KDE and later Qt. And I still recall how he offered me a job at KDAP in 2000, and I turned it down, and I always regret.
And
The biggest mistake of your life.
And straight out of bed, can I please invite on stage Tiago? Welcome, Tiago.
So yes, thank you for having me. My name is Tiago Macieira. I work for Intel. I'm the Qt Core maintainer, and I've been involved in KDE development and Qt development for close to 20 years now. My first connection with Qt and with KDE was, I don't read German, so I did not read Kalle's article. But I think it was a post somewhere on the internet and led me to kde.org. And I remember seeing that very 90s website that had a vision of creating a desktop experience for Unix environments. And I thought, yeah, right, they're going to get it. But I decided to get involved and to participate in a couple of things. My interest was networking. My interest has never been with the graphical things. So I tell people that I work on everything that you cannot see, not the visible things. And if people ask me, is Qt a GUI toolkit? Since I do not work on anything UI, no, it is not. It's more than that.
Thank you very much.
Jesper, may I ask the question in the meantime? Thanks for pulling off this great event on such a short notice, basically. And every session I was listening to worked out great. But a question to you as an organizer, what was the worst thing you saw happening, going really wrong during the last days? Somebody sitting there in a pajama or whatever.
No, everything worked out fine. Every presenter was well prepared and so on. The audience had spot on, very good questions. We had some technical problems, as you would expect on such young days in virtual meetings as we are in. I mean, everything started to be virtual right after Corona, so we had some problems, especially with YouTube. But I hope so that we got all the presentation recorded, and we'll put them out as soon as they have been processed and on YouTube, of course, so people can revisit them.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's any raised hand. Maybe this was a bad idea to start with. So there's a question here. Have you got an opinion on the upcoming Microsoft.NET multi-platform app UI, also known as Mau, as a competitor to Qt?
I can say something about that, maybe. So first of all, it's hard to say at this point because there is not a whole lot. There are mostly intentions. That being said, Microsoft has a very good track record of understanding developers, of making developer tools. I mean, they created Visual Studio Code in very little time and with great community involvement. It's very rapidly developing, but even previously, Microsoft developer tools have generally had when they finally fixed the C++ compiler, they got a very good reputation by way of developer tools. And and obviously they have marketing muscle, they have brand recognition, and they have the latter too, certainly to a greater extent than what the Qt company or even the whole Qt community does. So if they indeed get this technically pulled off, which at this point we don't have a lot of indication for because the GitHub repository doesn't actually show a lot yet, then this might certainly be saying this carefully, but dangerous competitor for Qt. On the other hand, Qt's been entrenched in many different industries for almost 25 years now, and that's a deep base of legacy and of anchoring that Qt has. So no matter who comes around, it will take a long time to unsettle any incumbent, including Qt. So I would not, at this point, not be very worried about this, about MAUI making Qt obsolete. But we'll certainly follow MAUI carefully once there is something to look at.
And think of all the Microsoft UI frameworks that have come and gone during those 25 years. So starting with MFC back then, Silverlight. So whoever did bet on that, it was pretty quick obsolete, while Qt stayed there with an almost compatible UI or API over all the time.
That's indeed true. They do have a track record of coming up with a new invention every couple of years.
Okay. So the next question is actually, is this a new annual event? I guess he's referring to Qt Desktop Days. And how do I get a t-shirt?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that question. How do I get a t-shirt?
Go to the store. And
then go to the printers.
Kelly, is this a new annual event?
I don't know. I guess this question needs to go to the people who invent vaccines. I think it's too early to tell. So far, I mean, we will need to next week. We'll need to sit down and get up and evaluate how well this has worked and how successful this was. And I think my guess would be that a large part of the community would still prefer in-person events when and if they are possible again. That being said, obviously a virtual event allows people for whom traveling is not an option for financial reasons, for visa reasons, or whatever, just because their employer doesn't let them go to conferences. It might. So what I could possibly see in the future happen is some kind of integrated events that have both virtual and on-site components. But whether we will run this, or whether maybe KDE will run this, or the Qt company, remains to be seen. That's way too early. But notice I'm neither saying yes nor no at this point. Being very diplomatic here.
You're almost like a politician.
Yeah, it comes with the job.
So here's the next question. Are there any plans on completing the Qt Quick Control offering, calendar, tree view, date picker, fully fledged table widget, etc., that you are aware of?
And you might also want to look at Andre's question. He's saying that Qt widget seems to be growing a bit dated. Do you think that the main stumbling block for QML is to have a modern desktop look?
You're way down the list.
I'm just adding because they're the same question, kind of.
Yeah. Well, Thiago, you're the GUI guy.
Now, okay, I'll try answering those questions. So let me start from the first one regarding having, let's say, just more controls. Sure thing. There is, I think, a number of bug reports open for each one of those, pretty much asking to have asking to add them to Qt Quick Controls. I'm fully aware, however, that that is not an easy task. The simple reason is that when you look at a class like Qt Tree View in Qt Widgets, that is a class that had I don't know, 15 years of development behind. These days, it doesn't change much, also because it already has 15 years behind it. So when somebody says, okay, let's just add one as a technical task, it's not going to be easy. And that pretty much is the reason why they're not just being added instantly. The other reason has to do pretty much with the fact that Qt Quick Controls so far has been most oriented towards, let's say, embedded/mobile applications. And so in those, some controls you really don't need. And that's why, for instance, we did not have at the beginning even a table widget that now we have a table view in Qt Quick Controls true now, I believe, or Qt Quick itself even. So there are plans, yes, there are, but I really cannot comment on how soon they will become reality. And in general, when we look at the situation of Qt Quick Controls versus Qt Widgets, I think one of the biggest problems right now is that each one is trying to play at its own strengths, and they are very different at the moment. So Qt Widgets at the moment can give you many things that just don't exist quite in the same way in terms of Qt Quick Controls. Things like, I don't know, sizing and layouting, which is much better done, I think, at the moment in Qt Widgets than in Qt Quick Controls, or much more customizable if you want. They give you very easy opportunities for implementing a custom widget or a custom behavior. If I need something totally personalized, then I can very easily create a Qt widget, override a couple of virtuals, make my paint event, and off I go. And instead, this thing in Qt Quick is not that easy to do, or it's a bit cumbersome. So if you need custom drawing, how to go about it? Do I make a painted item? Do I use the scene graph? And what if I need to react to some mouse event? Do I do that in C++? Do I do it in Qt Quick? And even that, how do I do that? Do I use mouse area? Do I use the new things? So you do see that the new things the fact that Qt Quick Controls is simply very new is what puts it in a situation of kind of disadvantage at the moment. I don't think that these things are not doable in Qt Quick. I just think that it needs its time to be developed further. You're just comparing, something 20 years old with something pretty much 5 years old, something like that, something that has nowhere seen the same amount of effort put inside in terms of feature development. So if I have to pick something that I really want from like Qt Quick Controls to say, yeah, this is now good for desktop development, more than actually seeing more widgets themselves, I would like to focus on the fundamentals. I want to see a proper layouting engine that is as good as the widgets one. I want to see easy opportunities for creating my custom widgets, my custom Qt Quick Controls, fully styled, etc., without touching private APIs, without just using the public stuff. All of that is still to come, and I think that is at the moment mostly the blocker for people building, wanting to use Qt Quick Controls to look good on the desktop.
Here's a question to Harry and Tiago, I guess. What they did not tell in their introduction of themselves are that they are ex-Trolltagers or ex-trolls. But the question is, I guess, just a wee little bit more broad than that. What do a cuter call himself? A cutist, a cuter, a cutie?
Let me start first. Okay, because I was there not as long as Tiago in the end. So back then it was just trolls. I think we were much more fighting with the issue of the pronunciation of Qt itself. So meeting a customer at a trade show, you would hear Qt, and then after some time they picked up the internal Qt, and so Tiago probably knows how that developed over time.
No, I think that we always called ourselves the trolls, and I have a T-shirt from one of the dev days from way back when that says in the back, "I'm a troll." Right? No, it says in the front, "I'm a troll," and then in the back says, "Yes, you can ask me questions about the organization of this thing because I'm here to help." Outside, because there's no more Trolltech, and by the way, this also says Trolltech here. I've heard both cute guy and QT guy. Both things are things that once you say aloud, it's the last time you do. So, too bad.
Let's hurry on. There is a question from John here saying, I always wonder if Qt could have done something different, better to have, oops, my view is growing, to become a popular choice for Android. Do you folks have any insight?
I can maybe comment a little on that on the market side. So when Bogdan Vatra, one of our engineers, brought Qt to Android, there was a very large Android development community already, and it used Java because that's what Google said people were supposed to use for Android development. And so that's what people did, and there was not really a perceived need of another toolkit, and that is also exemplified by the fact that when Google came to the conclusion that maybe Java isn't the ideal solution either, and they came up with Kotlin, a new language for Android. Actually, you would have thought that a couple of years after Google said, okay, turn around, use Kotlin now, that there would be a great adoption of that, and that has not happened. People still use a lot of Java. But if you look at the typical app you have on your Android, or actually on any mobile phone, it's fairly simple. So for many use cases, you don't need a very sophisticated environment. Obviously, there are quite complex apps, but from what I see, a large number of the apps that are available in the app stores are just wrappers around some sort of web view anyway. And then there are others that aren't, but that are still have rather simple UI needs. So looking at this isolated at what Android developers need, Qt for Android didn't really address an actual need. Where Qt for Android does address a need or has value is in second screen situations, where you have where you want to have an IT solution. I say this in the widest sense of the word, that runs on, for example, on desktops and on mobile phones, because sometimes you need to be mobile and can live with having a smaller view on less data, and sometimes you need to see the full data, and then you want to look at this at a desktop screen. And in that particular use case, there is actually decent uptake of Qt for Android, but of course that's a compared to the millions of apps that are floating around, that's a fairly narrow use case.
Yeah. And I can confirm the latter. We see Qt being used for such platforms if the project development is done in Qt already for the desktop. So there it's more doable choice, and there's some code reuse possible and so on. But for projects written from scratch, that's indeed a big hurdle. And I'm really amazed what both Google and Apple ask for from their developers. So they're changing the toolkits, programming languages, as Kalle said, and the developers just have to follow, and compatibility is not so great as other platforms offer. And I have the feeling that those hardware makers are rather after the consumers paying for apps, and not necessarily after the developers, who have to jump through a lot of hoops and don't have an easy life as it would be with Qt.
If I may
And
just
speaking from as somebody who works for a company that makes applications, we make very, very few mobile applications. So for the desktop, we still use Qt in a lot of places. So it's a different segment for us.
if I may just add to the issue of people using Qt already, and they can code reuse when they go to Android, for example. I think that as important thing is that they can also employee reuse, so they can take their existing set of employees and use those to also develop the app, rather than needing to have a complete second team there. Here's one for you, Pepe. You can just rewind and play back a bit of your keynote the other day. It's Johannes who's asking, my personal elephant in the room: if starting a new desktop application in Qt today, should I use widgets or should I use QML?
That is a very good question. I would say ultimately it depends on the kind of application you're building. There is no easy answer. It's not a black or white, a binary choice at all. Also because you can mix the two up to a certain degree. So you should first and foremost think about what does an application do and how do I want it to look like. If you want something which is completely custom and so on, then Qt Quick is pretty much the solution at the moment. If you wanted to give it more look a traditional desktop big app kind of look, so think of any, I don't know, big application like a CAD or numerical simulation or that kind of stuff. You know, those applications all employ the same UI concepts. Whether you notice or not, they do. That's something like that your brain notices, but even if you don't. And so those applications are better written these days using widgets, because widgets give you everything you need. And sometimes you can put yourself in the middle. So you can have part of application done in widgets, part of application done in Qt Quick, because it makes sense for those parts.
Okay. Now I just lost it in here. There's a question for you, Thiago, from Sergio. How's your motivation for Qt Core nowadays? Less or just more busy with non-Qt stuff?
That's two questions there, and they're not, they're orthogonal. So the first one is my motivation. I'm still very motivated. I still want to do a lot of things. The second one was about whether I have the time for it, and that isn't right now, unfortunately, no. I've been very, very busy with work, the day job for me, which has prevented me from doing what I really, really wanted to do, and unfortunately was the time for Qt 6 right now. And so I didn't do as much as I wanted, but we did get many of the things that I had been planning for, at least the foundation for it for 6.0. Some of the rest can be done later. Some of the others, I still want to see whether we want to do it. There might be some source incompatibility, so need to be checked. But other than that, the problem is really amount of time. Right now, I'm at my position at Intel. I'm working for the cloud computing group, so it's not really desktop. It's not even mobile. That means I do not. I mean, I work with Linux every day, day in, day out, but not graphical applications. Not something that could allow me to do work directly on Qt. What I'm going to try and do, and my manager and the leaders in my team have also agreed to, that makes a lot of sense, is for us to work on performance optimizations. And that would allow us to optimize libpng, libjpeg, encryption routines, and things like that, which would benefit Qt. And all of that knowledge would allow me to do many of the things I've always done in Qt that I love, optimizing strings, optimizing vectors, looking at the source code, and then adding new interesting features as they come. So expect more from me.
Excellent. That's good to hear. There's a question here saying, what area do you think that Qt will focus on in the future? Desktop, mobile, embedded devices such as automotive, or all of the above?
One interesting observation on that, what is Qt? Is it the project, the product, or the company? And one thing that has happened is that it was not always what the makers of Qt wanted that really happened. So there were attempts to make it run on phones and whatnot long time ago, but users just did something different, and that's where Qt moved.
So, if you read the CEOs or C-level statements in the yearly and quarterly reports of the Qt company, you will see that there are a lot of hits if you keyword search for IoT. So clearly, that is something that is very much on the agenda for Qt company management. I do not have the insight into the day-to-day development process, whether this is actually reflected by development activity or not. There is the fairly recent Qt for MCU offerings. Obviously, I have no insights into any sales figures that the Qt company may have there, but we have not yet encountered that in our consulting engagements, just as one data point. If the kind of the public statements of the Qt company management is anything to go by, then IoT is something where things will happen for Qt in the future. Then the next question is, do IoT devices even need Qt? Do they need a graphical user interface? I certainly would not like a small screen on my light bulb, but who knows? Other than that, it's really where the users are taking it. Any company of any maker of anything can say, we want our product to be used like this, and we want our product lineup to be like this, and we want people to buy it. If people don't buy it, and if people don't use it like that, then that won't happen.
I can also add. Can I add a little bit on that? Just to give another point that is kind of for me, each different industry more or less. I would say very likely is playing to Qt's own strengths, because when you look at the various segments, pretty much, if you look at embedded, there isn't pretty much anything but Qt in there. If you have, of course, a user interface that you want to run, sure, there is something else, and now also things like Android is trying to sneak in with other stuff, but pretty much the industry solution is Qt at the moment. There is simply nothing else because of Qt characteristics or performance. You cannot simply run an Electron application on a low-end device, even if most people wants to. They want to just have can I use my HTML5 screen? No, you can't on this 200 megahertz board. On desktop, it is a situation of pretty much in the last 10 years, I would say, most major, the actual toolkits from the various vendors have been somehow, I wouldn't say deprecated altogether, but not really cared by Microsoft or by even Apple. So Qt can kind of flourish when there is nothing else around. And as we said at the beginning, Qt has always also been a very good bet because Microsoft toolkits, they came by, then disappeared, deprecated, and so on, while Qt stayed around for 25 years now. And also on a small scale. So the fact that Qt wants to target things like microcontrollers, at least the upper segment of microcontrollers, it's just the natural evolution of the hardware. So now that the hardware becomes more capable, and we still use C++, we still use something which is extremely efficient, why not targeting that too? Because 10 years ago, dishwashers just had on the clock missing until the end of the cycle, and these days it's touchscreen because people want a touchscreen on their dishwasher.
Sounds like a new dishwasher soon.
Or your fridge, or your oven, or your alarm system, or your light bulb. And so once we come to that, what kind of thing do you want to run on your dishwasher? The choice there is going to be pretty limited, and Qt will fit all the checkboxes quite nicely. That's why I continue to see growth for Qt from this point of view. It's really because the market is changing in a way that always plays to Qt strengths one way or another.
Okay. There's a question here from Hakan that says, why do the Qt company focus so much on automotive solutions and automotive companies? When I check job updates, I hardly see other things. And unfortunately, the Qt company has thanked no to be with us in this endeavor. So we can't really ask that question to them. But let me paraphrase it then. So in looking out into the future, like 3 or 4 years, where do you see Qt move?
If you're not from the automotive industry, you may not notice the pressure, but I think all of us can confirm that Qt is already in use or is currently being prepared to use by a lot of car makers, almost all of the world, I would assume, without mentioning any names. And I also see benefit for everybody else there because they're applying quite some pressure to the Qt company on the Qt development, at least on the Qt Quick side, as they are really trying to squeeze it on those devices that need to run in a robust manner with medium-sized hardware, and performance has become an issue, and changes have been made to improve Qt just because of those cars. So there's no reason to be unhappy because everybody else profits.
Yeah, and I can talk about this as well because Intel sells to automotive, and I can confirm exactly what Harry just said. It's a very niche market, but with big opportunities. And unfortunately, all of the hardware that I've seen is underpowered for what it's supposed to do. There are very few car models that have spare processing capacity. So you're always looking at mid-end to low-end types of hardware. And they always start with trying to do web things. They realize it's never going to cut it. It's never going to boot in the time that it needs to show your rear view camera. And then they start looking at native solutions. And very often, when not using Intel hardware, for example, they can't even do that, right? So they need to find hacky solutions in order to come up with the solutions to the necessary timings and performance and functional safety requirements.
If I can also add something, the question was asked as, why does the Qt company focus so much? And obviously, I'm not going to second guess them. But if you ask, why does the Qt ecosystem focus so much? Or even why does a company like KDAB focus so much on automotive? Then, well, we do have a lot of automotive customers. It's one of the largest industries that we serve, and we bring home a lot of the bread by way of the automotive industry. And increasingly, you'll actually be hard pressed to buy a car that does not run Qt, at least any of the newer models, and that's just going to grow. And it's not just the cars, the autos, but it's everything else that moves: construction machines, tipper trucks, agricultural machines, harvesters, cranes, bulldozers. All these are increasingly digitized and receive some kind of graphical operator panel, and so it's quite natural that there is a lot of focus, just because there is a lot of market.
And another industry, since Jesper asked it more open, is medical industry. And I think that works completely different. It's not just a few big players in the world. It's a lot of small jobs with partially different requirements. And those are picking up Qt like crazy. And I assume there it's more like the word of mouth that is simply spreading from one developer to another, and the open source availability makes it great to start with a prototype, and it's really great for such devices as well to fully customize.
And if I may add my own observation here, being one of the old farts here on the panel and remembering the good old days, I remember back when Trolltech was spending a lot of energy on embedded, and everybody was going like, why are you spending all that energy on embedded? We should focus on the desktop. I see Tiago going, remember those days? And as a result out of that was that the class Q object became so much smaller, because that we needed to fit it onto the tiny embedded boards. But at the same time, that of course benefited everybody, and us today still with a much smaller footprint than otherwise. So I can see Pepe just about to chime in here. Over to you, Pepe.
Okay. Well, apart from the technical side of things, yes, indeed, the fact that Qt gets used, for instance, again, in the medical industry, in there you find all sorts of devices. There is not just like the middle-end embedded board. You can find a very low-end embedded board, and as well as the supercomputer or the workstation where they process CT scans, etc. So they have workstations with gigabytes of memory just to visualize imagery in real time. And Qt is used all over the board. I strongly believe the fact that Qt is still C++ is the advantage there. That's the technical advantage, but also the fact that it can address, it has solutions for each one of these players. So what do you have? What do you need to do? You need to do some pressure measurement device, so just like a little bit of like a VGA resolution screen, then we have a solution for you. You need to code for the workstation, we have a solution for you too.
So what are we looking into in the future of Qt? Is it all going to be VR, AR, voice input? Where's Qt going, and what will Qt's answer to that future be? Getting the silent treatment here, huh?
I don't know, because it will depend. It will depend on what markets we're going to address and what form factors they're going to be. So you mentioned, for example, AR and VR. I'm not sure this is coming to a regular app near you very, very soon. That is kind of a niche kind of market. The type of content doesn't sound like it's something we're going to see in Qt applications. It might be the same way as you have a web view. You have a specific widget that causes the application to show that. Voice input, however, sounds like it should have been there already. Text to speech and voice input are useful. I can see other things, for example. Qt has always supported dual screen, but I see web getting into that now. So I have a colleague who used to work for Trolltech and works for Intel next to me in the office when we got to the office. And he was working on dual screens. So have a web application be able to display on two screens. Well, we can do this, and we have been able to do this for 15 years in Qt. So what else can we leverage that we already have and what will the form factors change. And I think Qt will follow the devices as opposed to anything else.
Any other thought on that question?
I think it's indeed the flexibility that has proven as a success from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a good one. We need to be open for all kind of questions in this panel here, and all the questions so far has been more political and looking into the future. So here's a good old C++ almost question. What do you think about Qt's SQL offering? I have a web backend, and it feels to me that the current Qt SQL feature is lacking many things. ORM, migrations, good support for QML, etc., etc.
Absolutely true. Last year, we started to develop a first web-based application called Test Center, and I said, let's try to use Qt for that. We found a great open source framework called TreeFrog. That worked pretty well, but in the back end, we saw QSQL database, and that's the part where it still operates the same way as it did from the beginning, and integrating some object-oriented database there, that would have been a bigger step than using the traditional approach.
There's a question here from Sachi. I'm not entirely sure I understand it, so maybe you can read with me. The question says, consumer devices are owned by large vendors, and they don't show much love for Qt.
Not sure it's a question.
Yeah, it's probably like the Android phones, etc., that simply aren't maintained for a long time and pretty proprietary and no open systems.
Let's see. So I think that what he means is, and I don't know if you can unmute yourself and explain, Sergey. I think that what you're saying is that large device vendors, and not talking about mobile applications where you download the application, but not the manufacturer of the device separate from the application. When those come along, and this goes into the medical, goes into automotive, there isn't much ecosystem gain from those that make the applications. Because you can't develop for those devices, you don't get an SDK that has Qt in it to extend the device. But I don't think I agree with you when you say that they don't show much love for Qt. Maybe the perception is that they don't show, but they do appreciate the flexibility, the robustness, all of the performance gains that you have by using native code.
How long is Qt 5 going to be around?
Oh, sorry, I'm laughing. Well, I'm laughing because I've just spotted a request for expecting some Qt 3 code. So if that teaches us something, is that Qt 5 is going to be around for a very long time. I mean, officially, it's, I think, 3 years from now. That's the end of life of Qt 5.15, which is long-term support. That's kind of the answer we have at the moment. Then, of course, in 3 years from now, we do like Microsoft. So no, there is extended support for other 3 years or whatever. But still, I think the Qt 5 used in projects is going to be around for a very long time.
It will depend on how difficult the porting to Qt 6 is. Right? I think that we really wanted to make 6.0 the most boring major release ever. But there are sourcing compatible changes. Depending on what you're using, it will not be easy. We still have time to fix some of the issues. So, for example, I'm tracking a request from somebody who has an open source application saying, I was using Qt Text Stream and QXML Stream Reader, and you removed the support for different codecs. Now it can't parse this file that is encoded in some weird thing that some user had from 10 years ago. And our answer is we don't want to re-add everything that we removed to streamline, but maybe what we can do is add new API in 6.1 that will make it easier for you. So depending on how many issues you hit when porting, you will make the transition very easily, and I hope that it is the case for most of the applications. So not a lot of them will require 5.15. Some others will require some more time. And and this is a call for action for everybody here, please do test. Let us know the rough edges, where we broke source compatibility that we didn't realize we did, where the source incompatible change intentional is making your life really, really difficult, like the codecs, where building was difficult, where we failed to take into account some weird setup that you had that is really important to you. Let us know as early as you can so we can work on it.
Our first experiments haven't been that bad, so we did that exactly on time to also provide the feedback. Of course, there were some people who had to remove some old QRandom whatever functions. Tiago, I'm not sure whether you were involved in that, but there's one smaller part.
Yeah, the QRandom generator bounded. I have a task from Albert to go and add an overload that will simplify your life.
Thanks.
Okay. There's a question here. There was a talk of a KDE fork of Qt due to change in licenses. What is the status of this? And comments on whether this is a good idea or whether Qt company compromise, scrolling again, on license changes to make KDE happy. Anybody has any insights there?
So, go ahead.
Okay, so I don't think that is entirely accurate in the sense that I don't think that KDE themselves proposed to fork Qt. There's been a discussion related to some of the licensing changes coming announced, at least, regarding the next Qt versions and whether the long-term support releases would be released immediately to the public or be commercial only for 1 year and then released or something like that. Which I don't know how much of that is actually going to happen or is implemented. I wish we had somebody from the Qt company here to actually tell us what's going on, because this situation is, of course, outside of our control. And I don't think that, again, on the other hand, the Qt core would be compromising on licensing changes just to make KDE happy. Of course, KDE is a major user of Qt, but it is not by any means the only user. There's so much, there's just so many actual customers that depend on releases happening when they're supposed to happen, and not with like 1 year of delay, and meanwhile we have like security critical bugs unfixed because they're not using the right license. So I don't think it's just that. I think the solution is much more complex than that. And I don't think it's a stance of compromise. I mean, the Qt company announced publicly they want to support the open source version of it. They're not forgetting about that one. What this means practically is still unknown. I don't know even when these changes will be implemented, if any, because they were announced 1 year ago, more give or take, or 8 months ago, and nothing has changed.
So you're talking about the LTS changes, right? I think that what Niels was asking for was that there were some reports about the open source version, not LTS, the actual, all of them would be trailing behind some amount of time. That has not come to pass. There are no plans to do that I know of. I know a lot of people inside the Qt company that really object to this. So I don't think that there's any danger of it happening. But commenting on the hypothetical of whether this is a good idea, no. Categorically, no, it's not a good idea to fork. A fork only makes sense if you can carry 90 to 95% of the developers along with you to the new thing. It is usually to avoid some unpleasant person who happens to be in control. This is usually an open source project. It happened to glibc. The old maintainer was quite direct in the way that he talked about to people, causing people to want to go away from him. That is not the case for us here. It's not a personality clash, and no fork would carry more than 60% of the ecosystem, so it would be to the detriment of all. I really, really want to continue working with all of the developers inside Qt company, inside KDAB, inside FrogLogic, and outside of the community as much as we can.
And those who may not know where the relationship to KDE is, there is this KDE Free Qt Foundation, which is a contract that was agreed on a long time ago, and that actually helps to keep those both worlds together. And nobody of those parties is interested in forking. And I think this foundation helps to keep things together because it's a safety net for also the commercial developers.
Yeah. And I see a lot of thumbs up on those statements. I indeed agree that a fork is the last thing that everybody wants. That will be of no good for any of us. I would like to end up here. We have had a pretty good program this week. There has been many presentations on how to go from widgets to QML. But I like your input. Does the widget have a future? And if it does, what can the community do to help it go forward?
Okay, I'll kind of reinstate what I already said the other day during my presentation regarding the current state of widgets and the upcoming changes. So widgets are pretty much stable at this moment in time. The reason is strictly, if you want, it's technical. We don't want to change too much because any minor change you could think of is going to break somebody's application. Which is simply used too much for them to evolve in some fancy ways. Even adding new widgets is indeed carries a huge barrier because a new widget means supporting this widget on all operating systems. You need to make sure it works in a high DPI. You need to make sure it's stylable through QStyle, through style sheets. It needs to have accessibility support, all of that stuff, all that story. So the barrier is so high that indeed people just don't even come close to making a widget which will be as good as it needs to be included into Qt at the moment. So the recommended solution would be put it somewhere else, put it on the marketplace, put it on GitHub. Let's grow the ecosystem around Qt by adding more widgets. And when you look around, there are tons of these widgets available. That you could use in your application or custom styles or anything related to widgets. So at the moment, I would focus more to have them elsewhere. We could think of a separate library inside of Qt, but that also comes with its own technical burden. If we add some like widget add-ons or whatever inside Qt, we like very little promises. But we know it doesn't really scale. It's way better if we make these widgets available to everybody in an easy way. That I think was one of the things that the marketplace was supposed to address.
And the current set is almost complete at the same time as well. So I think the first thing that the community can do is at least come up with a request or proposal what's still to do, because not many new patterns have appeared during the last years.
Yeah, the only one that has appeared and we wish we had in Qt is, for instance, a ribbon bar, which we can't have because of patents. So that's pretty much the reason why Qt does not have that particular UI. It's not because it doesn't make sense. Everything else is pretty much there, or one way or another.
True, those buttons that are mentioned by Andre there, that's something, those switches that were introduced by mobile devices. Yeah.
Okay, the last question will come from a YouTube listener here, or watcher, or whatever you call that. Will Qt Creator have first-class support for Python? I guess none of you has any clue about that, but now it's out there. Tiago is unmuting.
I don't know. I mean, first of all, what do you mean by first class and what is missing? So,
unfortunately, there is a delay of 20 seconds for the YouTube video. Your question him and it get back to me, will be all over. So
One keyword to throw in there in favor of Qt Creator is that it's using the language server protocol behind the bags, and that is an approach which is designed quite well, I would say, and has worked in a lot of cases that enables or will enable even more support for languages that the developers of the IDE never planned to include. So, and Python language servers are available.
And let that be the final question. I'll let the four gentlemen here have a chance to have a final word. Anything you want to say? Should we start from the right, Thiago? Any final word on everything?
Thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really want to continue working on this. I really wanted to have more time for Qt. But continue to expect things from me. And I'd like to call for contributors too. So yes, you please do my previous call for action, test Qt 6, but try to get involved. Try to, if you're going to do building for Qt 6, it shouldn't be the largest step to making a small contribution. Let us know when you do. And you're welcome to work on Qt Core. I'll be happy to review things. I'll be gentle. I'll be guiding you if necessary. In other parts of Qt, I can't help because I can't really review. But other than that, you can count on me to help you out as well.
That's a generous offer. Thank you very much. Harry, any final parting words from you?
Besides, see you next year. Hopefully, thanks for not kicking me out of this panel. I'll support Thiago's move, and I think it's a hurdle that may seem difficult to overcome. But if you're just a Qt user, you look at the API and wonder, why doesn't it do the job like I want it to be? And there's the source code. It's nicely done. Look at it, extend it. You don't have to necessarily join the Qt company or whatever. It's really so open, and instead of just complaining or waiting for something to happen, it's sometimes much easier to do it by yourself.
Pepe?
Yes. So first and foremost, thank you very much to everybody. Also to the audience, which has been great during this week, asking lots of questions. I'm glad that this actually worked. It's a first for us, and hopefully won't be the last. On a technical side, yes, please be active around Qt. I mean, there is. I mean, when I look at the task tracker, Qt has nowhere the number of bugs you should have filed against, given its size. And so it could be because we are extremely good at what we do and we never create bugs, but we know that it's actually not the case. We want more input from the community, not just because something doesn't work, but also, hey, can I have a method that does this? And sometimes it's really so easy for us to add it, but we don't have this kind of input from the community. We will never think of it ourselves, and so eventually don't want to do it. So please give back as much input as you can, because it all helps.
Okay. Final words from you, Callum?
Yeah, I'm really glad this worked out, as this conference week worked out as well as it did. The idea is actually not very old, so there hasn't been. Normally, conferences are at least a year in the making, and this was barely a couple of months, weeks, really only. And I know that our teams, in particular the marketing and the system administration team, and the people from KDE who have supported us, have struggled hard at some times in the background, and there were a few technical lapses, like the YouTube stream collapsing occasionally. But in general, I was quite worried about how well the system would hold up, and it's done this very nicely. There were some great talks. I listened to as many of them as I could. So from that point of view, I think this was a success, and obviously we over here at KDE, we hope that all the attendees think this was a success too. as I said previously, who knows what's going on next year? Who knows what the world will look like, feels like? It's very hard to predict anything at this point. But assuming that the underlying situation hasn't changed much, we'd certainly consider running something like this again. Whether then it's actually possible remains to be seen. So thanks a lot to everybody for their hard work.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, let me, while the text runs out of the screen, whatever you call that, let me just say thank you here to a few people. Start to say thank you to Adam, who came up with the idea of this event altogether. It has been a great run. I have personally enjoyed it very much because this must be the first conference in what must be 10 years where actually we're able to listen to all the whole program. I'll say thank you to Charlotte, Sabine, Francis, and Tobias for doing the hard work of keeping it all together. To our sysadmin Stefan and Patrick for, well, rebooting the YouTube server so often. We had our share of technical problems, but hopefully the videos afterwards will put that up. I'll especially like to reach out and say thank you to KDE and especially Kenny Coyle for his huge contribution with helping setting up BBB, Big Blue Button here, and keeping it running throughout the whole week. Thank you to Pepe for putting the programs together. Thank you to all the speakers and the 4 gentlemen here on your screen for showing up and contributing. And thank you to everybody who have joined the presentations and been listening in. And thank you to all of you that will be listening in for the months and years to come. And finally, thank you to everybody who still believes in the desktop. And let that be the final.